All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Emma. I really appreciate it. It's been
Thanks
a
for
pleasure
inviting.
getting to know you. And really how this started, as I've talked to several people, I really had good conversations with lots of people that were willing to share with me what they do. And being independent folks in our industry, I think it's good to be able to give people a platform and a voice. So what you do is a little bit different than most of the interviews that I do. Most of the interviews that I do are with direct financial planners or financial advisors who run their own practice. And for you, you are instead a trainer, a facilitator of financial planners. So before I ask the first question, describe for me what it is that you do.
Oh, okay. So I'm just pausing because I'm wondering whether I should just tell you a little in telling you that it might
Yeah,
be interesting for me to just tell you a bit about how I got here as well. Because
please. Yeah.
so I got here through there's two stories to tell you how I got here. I'll tell you
Yeah.
them both. I'll try and keep them quite short.
Okay.
The first story is let's rewind back to Emma in her 20s, newly married with young children, seeking some financial advice. We went to my husband's dad's financial planner and we had a conversation. And of course, well, not of course, but my husband and I pretty much were arguing a lot of the time about money at the time in our lives.
Yeah.
With young children, I had stopped working. I felt disempowered. I was, really struggling with getting my head around that. And our experience was that when we approached our financial advisor, as soon as I started or my husband started approaching our kind of difficulty in our lived experience rather than the numbers on the spreadsheet, you could kind of see him retreat through fear that this wasn't his arena, and he would kind of revert to talking about the numbers, kind of bamboozling us with a bit of jargon, and it was kind of a wholly unsatisfactory experience. At the time, I kind of blamed myself for not understanding, but it just didn't meet our needs. So that was one story. Let's keep that one in the background.
Please. Yeah.
And the other story is that I worked for many, many years as a psychotherapist, and quite happily so, absolutely loved my work. And I bought my eldest son a book, and it was a book called How to Manage Your Money Like an Effing Grown Up. And he didn't read it because I don't know if you know, but most sort of 19-year-old young men don't need books because they kind of
they know everything
already.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah.
So it sort of sat on the coffee table, and nobody picked it up until I picked it up. And when I picked it up and I started reading it, I didn't put it down again until it was finished because I found it fascinating. And what it did was meet me in the place that I had hoped that financial advisor all those years ago would meet me. It helped me to understand the concept of personal finances, and I finished the book feeling empowered that I could do this myself and with a sense of clarity. And so I decided I wanted to learn more, and more ended up being a personal challenge. And I ended up qualifying as a financial advisor here in the UK without really planning to do anything with it other than my own knowledge. And then my husband said to me, why don't you think about career shifting? And I was like, yeah, why don't I think about career shifting?
Yeah.
I took a role in financial services, but quickly realized that what I'd hoped for, which was to offer the kind of financial advice I had hoped for all those years ago, it wasn't set up in that way, that the relational, emotional facets of that relationship were very backgrounded. And so that's how I got here, because I decided to found and launch Emotional Finance. And now what I do is I facilitate, I train, and I consult with financial planners to help them to kind of fill that gap between their technical training and expertise and the work of building meaningful and allied relationships with their clients so they can offer meaningful and allied advice. So
that's beautiful.
I wasn't. Apologies.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful. What I love that you described too is it's a whole shift that the whole industry is noticing. Your story talks about going to an advisor that was a friend of your husband's father, or
Yeah,
that was
it
his
was my
advisor.
husband's father's advisor. Yeah,
Yeah, and so when we see that it's a huge experience that so many people have, where it's it's almost like they inherit an advisor, even if it's not dealing with an inheritance. That's usually where the referral comes from. It's
100%.
usually from somebody's parent, more frequently from somebody's father, and it's true as a characteristic, financial advisors, financial planners, we're not typically very good at dealing with the very real emotional parts of that relationship and how that needs to work. We tend to like to plan them into submission. So I think it's really valuable what you're providing, as we see a need for it. The
Yeah.
consumer industry is demanding it. So I'll go ahead and ask this. I'd like to jump
Oh,
right in to what is the hardest part for you of being a trainer, a facilitator
yeah.
to financial planners? What's the most difficult?
Well, it's interesting because actually, had we just before you answered the question, had I replied to what you were saying, it's
Mhm.
kind of the answer that I'm going to give here,
Sure,
which is
sure.
that I guess I kind of want to say, well, of course, financial planners aren't good at this.
Yeah,
I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, all the training to be a financial advisor is entirely technical. There's
yeah.
absolutely no training, there's no space, there's no support for that the personal impact and the kind of what I call the in between the
Mhm,
client and the advisor. So that's often the hardest bit for me. Not the work itself, if I'm really honest, I don't find hard. I just find
mhm,
fascinating and fulfilling. Um, but the hard bit is the beforehand, which is that I think that advisors and planners sometimes it's this weird thing that they haven't been taught it, and yet they're sometimes a bit ashamed that they can't do it. So it's hard to ask for help.
mhm,
So sometimes I worry that, well, what I see is that advisors feel a bit anxious about acknowledging that they find this difficult. And so a
yeah,
lot of my work is about trying to normalize and reassure advisors that on the one hand, of course they can't do it as well as they'd like because they haven't been taught and supported.
right,
And yet on the other hand, it's not rocket science. It's not something magical that they can't access without commitment and practice. So there's kind of it's a bit of a paradox,
right.
but that's the hardest part, if that makes sense.
It does make sense to me. And
Mm.
based on your lived experience, your first time going to an advisor, it's funny because a lot of clients, I think, find the opposite experience of what they're afraid of or feeling ashamed or guilty of, is that they don't have all this expertise around money. Like it's something they should have just, I don't know, inherited or just innately known as they've grown up. And so we've got an advisor on one side who doesn't feel equipped to tackle the emotional problems of a person's very real life, and we've got a client on the opposite side of the table who feels ashamed and guilty that they don't already know this stuff and that they even had to come. So I think
Yeah,
that's that's a big disconnect, and that you're helping to bridge that gap.
yeah.
So I know that you said you find this very fulfilling. If you had to put it in terms, what do you see as your biggest payoff when working with financial planners or advisors?
I think what it is it's just so wonderful to see advisors flourishing in a way that it's not about learning the technical piece, but it's just about kind of learning to trust themselves a bit more with
Mhm.
the relational piece. So I work with a lot of early career advisors who often are fearful of not knowing the answer. They feel underconfident because they're trying to emulate their senior colleagues and think they have to be like them in
Yeah.
order to be successful.
Mhm.
And so, what's so wonderful is watching kind of spines grow and eyes brighten when they realize that actually they can find their own authentic way of doing it, and
Right.
that's how to build the confidence. And also at the other end of the spectrum,
Mhm.
working with more seasoned professionals who perhaps were taught some particular skills and taught that they have to be incredibly professional, and working with them and helping them realize that they can build more authentic connections, and that often that feels lighter. They can feel a sense of freedom that comes with that, and confidence in their work with clients. I think that's the wonderful thing.
That's beautiful. I think when I'm talking to people, most of the time I'm thinking about a next generation, folks that are coming up and learning to do things a different way as different demographics are demanding it. But
Mm,
I think it's also important that I not forget people who have been in the game for a really long time, but are needing to improve themselves, improve their skills, because it is a bit of a difference here.
yeah,
I don't know if you've done a lot of research on where that's at in the UK. I know in the United States we're undergoing the great wealth transfer.
yes.
75% of women are going to be, or excuse me, 75% of the wealth is going to be in the hands of women
Hmm.
within the next decade, and that's already happening. And it's not that women demand necessarily as a demographic that they demand female advisors, although I think there's a great space for that to improve with more females in the business, but that they do demand actual value, actual listening, and actual being willing to convey things in a manner that makes sense. Where previously it's a bit of a caricature, but I think the caricature makes sense of, someone's father that played golf with them, and the first time that you ever speak with them because there was an inheritance or something like that, they kind of just sit in a puffy suit behind a giant wooden desk and blow cigar smoke in your face and say, "Don't worry about it, I've got it." You know, and we're nobody wants to experience that, and so both seasoned and young professionals are needing to move in that direction. Have you noticed that shift as well?
Yes, although you'll have to remember that I'm quite new in this space, so I
Sure.
haven't a long history of change. But what what comes up for me to speak to what you're talking about? Well, actually,
Mhm.
my brain just like fired off in about 100 different
100.
directions, because this feels like such an important, resonant kind of thing to talk about. So I'll approach it from a couple of different angles, if that's okay. So
Please.
one is that the professionals I work with tend to be on a spectrum between two sort of extremes.
Okay.
At one extreme is the kind of old school advisor who's incredibly professional, uh, and focuses on their technical skill and finds it quite hard to build trust and build connections, and possibly is behind the desk with the cigar,
Yeah.
and wants to kind of impart their knowledge in a kind of one directional expert. You'll have to forgive the term if it's offensive, but in a kind of slightly mansplainy way.
No. Totally. It's appropriate for this case. I think it makes
But
sense.
that's one end of the spectrum, and I often find that those sorts of advisors are a bit disorientated by what's going on, a bit disorientated by being told they need to do things differently,
Mm.
and often are kind of dealing with a level of burnout or exhaustion because they might be having to constantly replenish their client bank, especially when we think about the wealth transfer and we think about widows
Yes.
changing their advisor quite quickly because it was their husband that had a relationship with the guy at this end of the spectrum, and therefore they want to now find someone who can meet them when they're at. So that's one end of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum is the advisors who really lean into the empathy and building relationships, but perhaps haven't had the support to work out where their boundaries are. And so they will often go home exhausted, carrying the emotional weight and feeling a sense of over responsibility
Mm.
for both the financial and the emotional aspects of their clients' lives. And they'll be burnt out too because they're trying to do too much. So there's something about bringing the professionals I work with into the kind of middle, where it's a much more sustainable way of working.
Yes.
So that's one way of coming at it. And then the other way of coming at it is, I completely agree with you that, you know, that the statistics show about the wealth transfer. We can also think about kind of Gen Z and millennials wanting, you know, they don't need to have a relationship with a financial advisor in their mind to get the advice. They can find that. They've got resources. You know, the commoditization and the availability of the information is there.
Mhm.
They want more of a relationship. But I think sometimes, and it is a bit of a caricature, you're right, that women want more hand holding and relational kind of help.
Mhm.
And this is also a bit of a caricature, but I'm going to go with it anyway. I
Mhm.
think often that men want exactly the same thing, but perhaps don't feel like it's okay to ask. So if they're with an advisor and they don't really understand and they want a bit more help, historically,
Mhm.
again, stereotypically and with caricature, they'll find it harder to say, I don't understand, can you help me with that? Because that it, you know, caricature is, it's harder to kind of sit with the vulnerability and the uncertainty. So they might be saying they understand and yet they don't.
Yes, I've in my own personal experience with clients, I've also seen that that can be particularly true if you have a couple that you're working with, because there is this feeling of, well, as a man and as a provider, as a as a caregiver for my family, I need to already kind of be on the same level with this
Mm,
guy. I
mm,
need to be the professional and not needing to show off, but feeling like they're competent in front of their spouse or in front of their children, as opposed to a situation where they can be more earnest and say, "Hey, this doesn't make sense to me." Especially for
yeah,
me, I'm pretty young in my career, and I'm working with people that are in their 60s and
yeah,
retirees, and so that can sometimes feel a little bit odd. Like, I mean, what is this person who's decades younger than me? What is it
mm,
that he has on me? And being willing to ask those questions. I agree.
yeah,
It can be really
yeah.
difficult.
And so I think that there's a piece for the advisor in that situation, or the planner, to really create an environment that explicitly feels collaborative, that invites the clients to know that, you know, you have some expertise, but they're the expert in them. And you're willing to let go of the need to be an expert in that room. And if you ask questions in a way that acknowledges that you don't know everything, it invites them to do the same. It kind of gets rid of what I think historically has felt like a bit of a hierarchy in
Mm.
advice, in the process of advice.
Yes. What you're describing is that need to kind of dispense knowledge
Yeah.
as opposed to having a good conversation like you would with a friend or
Yeah.
someone that is on an equal playing field with you. Yes, you're a professional, but they didn't necessarily come to you to regurgitate all of the wisdom you've accumulated from on
Yeah.
high
Exactly.
down to their level. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask uh, where you feel the way that I usually ask this question is, what do you feel that you do better than anyone else?
Mhm.
You're a bit of a unique one in what it is that you do. And so tell me where it is that you provide value and what you've seen very specifically about you.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like, if I think about myself in the space of what I offer, I think there's kind of overlap or resonance with financial planners who lean into a coaching mindset,
Mhm.
and probably also the field of psychology, which has been really well received, which is wonderful
Yes.
within the financial planning profession. And I see myself as different to those two um, influences, for want of a better word. And I really value both of those. And I see my difference as coming from my years of lived experience as a psychotherapist. So, really understanding relational dynamics, both between myself and my clients, but also between my clients and the people and places and environments that populate their world. So, for example, one of the sort of services I offer is that I will listen to an advisor's client recordings, and from that I will be able to pick up on a lot of the nuances of what might be going on for that client or between the client and advisor in a way that I feel is very unique given my background as a psychotherapist. Also, I have developed an emotional finance model, which is my proprietary methodology that I use for all my work, really, my training consultancy. And what that does is I guess at its most basic, it translates the skills and practices that we use in psychotherapy and specifically for the financial services profession. So, I have both the training and the practice, the lived experience of using those, and I'm putting inverted commas in soft skills. That is the work of a psychotherapist, really. And so I'm bringing my lived experience of that into this field, and I think that also puts me in a really unique position because it's not the study of, it's not academic study of, it's the reality.
I see that as almost it's a unique Venn diagram, where you are kind of in the overlap between the two, and there's a unique place where you get to spend your time and spend time teaching others about it. I think it's extremely useful. Is one of the things that attracted me to not just to you, but to others who are actually putting pressure on the industry that we are being expected of a higher order. It's no longer going to be sufficient just to know stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's not that hard to know stuff, right? Information is becoming very accessible, and it's not as opaque as it seemed maybe 20 or 30 years ago. And even with the rise of new technology, right? It's not really hard to use AI tools to get the information that you need. So what on earth is the purpose of a financial planner anyways? And I'd love to hear your opinion on that as we go into the future and we have even better and better technology. Even some people are using ChatGPT as their therapist, which I don't know how great that's going to turn out. Jury's out, right? But as we see that future, where do you see what you do and the emotional finance methodology helping in the future?
Yeah. Well, I feel incredibly optimistic. I feel like I can speak only for the UK, where I really do feel like the profession is acknowledging that in order to achieve good outcomes for clients, here our regulator has been really vocal recently and very clear on the fact that they expect firms to look at the consumer duty, to look at the commitment to good client outcomes through the lens of client vulnerability. And I think that's a huge step forward because, of course, we can't put vulnerability over there in some sort of tick box compliance exercise. We're all vulnerable, and and vulnerability is a compliance issue, of course, but it's also, or mainly, a relational issue. Unless clients are going to talk to you unless clients are going to trust you and feel like you're a safe place to disclose things that make vulnerable, they're not going to disclose them. I feel like I slightly got off track from your question. I was talking about feeling optimistic. And so I feel like that's becoming far more front of mind. And then, of course, it follows that if you are going to kind of lead with that sort of approach, we have to support advisors and planners more with this relational piece. It's just, how can we not? I mean, so yes, I feel incredibly optimistic. has that answered your question? I feel
I
like
think, I think it does. Yeah. I mean, so as an example, right, and this is kind of why I ask it. As an example, I'm an individual, and I'm on NAPFA, which is a national association for planners and financial advisors. And I got a client a few months ago who said she reached out to me. She was attracted to my profile because I actually shared a story
Uh-huh.
about my family.
Mm,
And it is sometimes hilarious to me. I'll make jokes about it for other firms that if I see the term comprehensive planning or tailored plans on your website, on your profile, again, I'm just going to lose it because we see that type of copy that's
mm,
rote presentation, and that doesn't mean anything to a person
mm,
really trying to reach out to a client. That's before the relationship is even started. The way
mm,
that you are holding yourself out there as a financial planner, a financial advisor, if you start talking about this is the type of customization, obviously there's some specialization that you can say that you have, but that alone is not going to endear somebody to you.
mm,
I had a client, a prospect interview last week too, that was an individual got referred to me, and it wasn't necessarily a technical specialization or a certification that I had, but the fact that we bonded over having special needs children, and
mm,
that I was willing to share that and some of my experience, and
mm,
she shared some of hers. And now, by the end of that call, she said, "I'm going to share your number with a lot of people." And that's after
mm,
30 minutes, and that's after before she even accepts me as her advisor
yeah,
and accepted her as a client.
yeah.
So, I would say maybe something else as we're finishing up. What would your, for lack of a better term, sales pitch be to advisors who are still maybe on the fence? Maybe
Uh-huh.
they know they need to make some changes, but they're
Yeah.
still kind of on the fence. Like, I don't want to be a therapist. That's not my thing. I'm not in that space. How would you speak to them about how this is really helping them,
Yeah.
helping their business attract
Yeah.
clients, keep clients?
Yeah. Well, I would first of all be absolutely in agreement with them that they should not be a therapist because they're
Right.
not trained to be a therapist. And I would be very clear that my expectation of them would never to be a therapist, but rather what they need to learn to do, and I would support them to do that, is to meet clients, to build trust, to connect and to collaborate with them, but always through the lens of, I is this in the service of my client?
Mm.
And and is this relevant to their financial landscape? Because if it's not, then that's probably not the sphere you should be working in. So that was the first thing that I would be doing, is I would be pulling them back from that misconception.
Mhm.
And then I probably would lean into both the commercial aspects of being able to handle and navigate the emotional and relational skills necessary for the role. So, if you can connect with the client and build a shared understanding and be authentic, you're more likely to convert. You're more likely to retain your clients and to build loyalty and to have referrals.
Yeah.
And we can link back again to the whole idea of the the wealth transfer and all the other aspects of that, and the threat of AI. So
Yeah.
it's gonna make commercial sense to your business, and from a personal and professional stance, you're going to enjoy your work so much more. You're going to go home with a lightness and a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. So those are the probably the three things that I would lead with if
I
I was
think
doing.
that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful, and the summation of some of these things I hear you say is that you're going to teach us how to present yourself like an actual human being to another person. It's not about putting forward a curated financial advisory looking cardboard cutout of
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
It's how to take all of your best qualities as a person and as an expert, and being able to bring that to bear in a client's
yeah.
life.
And I might ever so slightly change the language there, and I
Mm.
would take away that you're going to present yourself,
Mm.
And I would say, I'm going to support you to build the conditions of trust, because trust is in the gift of your clients. You can't
Yes.
ask for trust.
Hmm.
You have to behave in a way that's trustworthy. And then you're going to, rather than present yourself, you're going to work on your own presence, and you're going to work on your capacity for dialogue and authenticity and all these other skills and facets that are part of my model, because the work is going to be inside out,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. You're going to work on yourself, and then that is what your clients will see, rather than working on thinking about your presentation to clients. There's a slight nuance difference there, and I don't know if I'm making sense or I've
No,
explained.
it does. It very much
Yeah,
does. And that leads me to probably what I'll say would be my last question is,
yeah,
in the work that you've done, do you see it as a method of increasing that level of integrity that's coming through? Not just in terms of, all right, are they going to steal my money from me or not? Are they going to do something illegal or commit fraud? But
yeah,
is there a higher level of integrity when you get to know a person more accurately, and when they get to convey that to a
yeah.
client better?
So uh, I've got in my model, the first ring of study is about building the conditions of trust. And I identify 4 facets of
Mhm.
building trust. One is benevolence,
Mhm.
caring. One is transparency. One is competence, and the last one, I've kept it to last because it meets your question more, is integrity. And
Okay.
integrity is about making sure there is no acting with integrity is acting with congruence. So it's about making sure there's no gap between your intentions and your behavior,
Mm.
and no gap between your values and your behavior. So absolutely, it, and integrity, as I said, works from the inside out. You don't develop integrity by thinking about what you should do or what somebody else thinks you should do. It needs to come from your own internal sense of values and what you intend to do. And so yes, absolutely, it's very much part of it's part of my model, and it's part of what I support advisors to build their own awareness of, and build their practice of. Yes.
I love it. Well, again, thank you for your time. I appreciate
Thank
that. I
you.
think after this conversation, what I feel confident is any client would be really lucky to know that their advisor is training, is going through these things, is
Yeah.
working and developing on themselves, and more than just advisors who want to improve themselves and improve their business. I think clients would really value this work that you're doing. I think it's
Yeah.
extremely important. I love that you're doing it, and I can't wait to see the bigger and greater success of this emotional finance model you're presenting.
Thanks so much. And thanks for inviting me. It's been a great chat.